I don't know if you guys are familiar with former Representative Steve Christiansen. Do you guys know him?
Not familiar with him, but I've heard of him.
Okay, he was he's a patriot and was looking into the elections. He was totally maligned and they just threw him under the bus just for asking questions in the legislature about our elections. We have internal memos of how our lieutenant governor and certain legislators in the legislature choose to talk about other legislators who ask questions about elections, and it's pretty disgusting. Anyway, he ended up resigning because the pressure and it was just so wrong how they were treating him. He felt he could be more powerful in other areas. Anyway, he requested for the voter rolls from the lieutenant governor. And because he's a legislator, he's legally owed those voter rolls. And she denied him. Well, then we have Representative Phil Lyman. You guys are familiar with him, right?
Yep, we know Phil.
So Phil requests the voter rolls not just once, but twice. And she refused the voter rolls to Phil as well. And I guess on the second refusal or denial, she said, I quote, "I'm not comfortable giving those to you." So now we learned that our lieutenant governor seems to, maybe she just thinks like we follow the laws that we're comfortable with, and those that we're not comfortable with, we don't follow. I don't know. We're trying to figure it out.
So
well, and go ahead.
Did the auditors have access to these voter rolls?
So go ahead, Jen. Were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say they did a little bit. Remember that this is not really what we call an audit. This is a fraudit in a sense. I mean, because there's no verification. Yes, they were bringing people in, but these people are state employees.
So the government looked at what the government did and found the government.
The fox in the hen house, like
the government did nothing wrong.
The state pays them. You know, they're all in together to make sure there's no risk to the state. Well, the thing that's the riskiest to them is the truth coming out, right? So they're doing this audit/fraudit. And I don't mean that the people who did it were malicious in any way. I just believe that the process that legislatively they put in place assured that there would not be full transparency. In other words, let's look at 1%, say we did our jobs, and we have records of them even during the pandemic, them using telephones to call 10 people to do the canvas to certify results. Well, making 10 phone calls, did that even really happen? We have no way. I mean, they say it did. You get to that point where you're going, that's not really an audit. And that's, I think, the biggest thing to me is we want an independent person from the outside, an independent agency who is not a state employee, who does not have vested interest in covering for the state's frailties. Now, they did find some things which were pretty amazing. The first one is that, and again, this audit took place in December of 2022 is when we got the final report. And one of the points is that Utah's election controls, and this is exactly their wording, one of their findings, Utah's election controls mitigates the risk of fraud as long as they're used properly. Well, duh. So what is proper? And again, we have an administration here who seems to like to reinterpret the law according to their own wishes. It's proper to give us public records that they're denying us. And some of my election ones are still in court, by the way. Salt Lake County is suing me to prevent access. So they're, like Sophie said, Steve Christiansen and especially Phil Lyman. Phil Lyman fought multiple times to try to get those voter rolls that by law he is allowed, but she's not comfortable. So to sit there and say that we can mitigate the risk for fraud if they're used properly, I dare say we're not using them properly then.
Properly.
And they say there's no fraud here. Well, how do you know you're not looking?
Here's my big question. It doesn't seem like there's enough of a ruckus in the general population to actually fight this. If the general population all stood up and said to the governor and the lieutenant governor. Well, maybe not, because when they voted on legalization of marijuana, our legislature ignored that. I don't know. I've often wondered if Utah isn't selected for this shadiness because of the heavy trusting Mormon population that kind of go along to get along.
Yeah, I think that and their natural resources. And if we can go back historically, there was a huge public outcry in October of what year was that, Sophie? 2021?
Yes.
Where 800 to 1,100 people showed up in person and online at the legislature to fight for their right to have an audit. And what we got with this little, semi-audit that we just, read the first report on, wasn't what we asked for. It wasn't what Phil Lyman asked for in his House Bill 371. It was a stripped down, watered down, heavily, what is the word I'm looking for, Sophie? Heavily involved with the lieutenant governor. It was very orchestrated how the language on this bill was going to read. And it, frankly, in my opinion, was a way to shut the people up and put them back to sleep. Fine, we'll give you an audit. It's one that doesn't mean anything. It's with our own ploy. But these are all the questions that really aren't being asked, except for Phil Lyman at the moment, who's an auditor himself. He's very, very alarmed at what he's seeing.
So you weren't invited to the audit, is what you're saying.
No, we weren't. And, I was just laughing because one of the points on the summary of the audit, just listen to this. Maybe it doesn't make you laugh as much as does us, but one of them is canvass ballot totals from Utah's 2022 primary election did not match those recorded in the central voter database.
So when they did a canvass, was that them making calls? Or
that is, well, I think now they will call even a canvass calls, and maybe they go out to one or two houses,
And even at that small a number, it didn't match?
Yes.
Okay, let's say if they said, okay, we're gonna pick a district or a county, or even we're going to even canvass a middle city neighborhood, 300 houses, and ask them, not going to ask them their name, not going to write it, just going to ask them, how did you vote? Take the summation of all of that information, put it in, and see if it has a rough reflection on what came out of that district that voting year. That I would call a canvass. But if they're calling any less than, I would say, 400 houses in a known area, then they're not canvassing.
Well,
go ahead.
Sorry, and you're right. But I think in my mind, it doesn't even matter how they're defining a canvass. In their very own audit,
it says it didn't match.
The numbers didn't match. I mean, how do you defend that?
Well, it's a percentage.
And especially when we've had, there's been people who have done canvassing in St. George, Spanish Fork, Cottonwood Heights, Weber County did a canvass up there. None of them came back saying things were good. Mm-hmm. They all came back saying there is a lot of problems. And the fact that we have this report, this is 98 pages of problems, you guys. This isn't one piece of paper that was put on, out on an email. 98 pages of problems that they noted in the audit. And the only conclusion they came to was there was no fraud. 98 pages of problems of numbers not matching. And what's crazy about that too is we've got the Willie Billion story. If you guys remember him down in St. George, his race was incredibly close, razor thin. He asks for an audit. They do 1%, and in that 1% of the audit, he actually wins, according to what they right.
Yes, and the funniest part is Deidre Henderson got to pick which 1% were audited.
So she selected the criteria.
Yeah,
still lost.
He wins it, and they still don't give it to him. They're like, whatever, go away.
this provides a valid point for carbon copies. Like I'm thinking, if you had a carbon copy on the back of your voter bubble sheet, and you mail that one direction, and then you mail your voter form in
Ooh.
another, wouldn't you have?
That's a good
The
idea.
ability to-
You have 2 recording offices.
Yeah.
Much
sorry.
like
I better be quiet. I might get audited.
much like a blockchain voting recording would work, which is a constant argument.
You know, that has been brought up in like most of the circles that Jen and I have been in. Our personal our personal opinion is we do not want to go to blockchain voting.
Well, yeah, I get that argument a lot. What I like about, here's the 2 things that I like about the idea is, one, it's recorded among so many nodes that not one person can physically get on there and corrupt it. The key to that obviously is writing the program for the actual voting, for putting the information in. Number 2, on a blockchain, there's no going to the lieutenant governor and begging to see the information. It'd be to where you can just log on and there's just an outline of what was. There's no one on that side that gets to filter what you get to see. It's just laid out in front of you.
That's a valid point. That really is. I think with what we've discovered and learned, Jen and I, like the history of once you bring in any amount of tech or machines or software, like you're kind of writing a blank check for manipulation of our votes.
And that could be true. That could be true, but
only if you cannot see the code to the software.
It's open code, so
it would have to be open source.
That seems to be the big problem we have. Another issue we have is paper ballots haven't always been honest either. I mean, you can go to old Honest Abe's second re-election and read about what went on after that and the conversations after that. Oh, looks like Sophie got a call.
She'll get back on.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure that this isn't part. I mean, here's the problem. We can sit there and talk about, is it the machine, is it whatever, but if there is no transparency in the result and there is no real audit, it doesn't matter where the problem, I think, really lies. Transparency has to be taken away from the public to pull this off. It has to. And the fact that Utah, particularly starting in the year 2020, stopped giving its citizens public records on elections for the first time, when they've done this historically in the past, have granted access to this information, they suddenly stop doing that and say that it's against the law, that everything's proprietary, that everything has to be locked up, everything has to be sealed after the canvass. Well, that's one more reason why they probably want these canvasses to be so short, because the minute you finish the canvas, everything is sealed, never to be seen again. And that's part of what our lawsuit is fighting, is that their interpretation of the law. We read it differently. We understand it to be that the originals are sealed in case of a contest, not any copies or anything electronic reports. Those should still be available. But a statistician did some data on it. This is very interesting for Utah. In 3 counties, it was Davis County, Utah County, and Salt Lake County, looked at the data on what was reported for state official data versus what the data was that was given to this committee when they asked for public records. And just like the canvas, guess what? The numbers didn't match. In other words, what the public records showed the actual numbers were significantly less than what was being reported. So we've got this slush fund or this bubble or whatever you want to call it, this cushion of votes that nobody can account for. And when Sophie was talking earlier about the voter rolls, one of the things that makes Utah unique is the fact that we have 3 categories of voter rolls. We have the public ones, which, like they say, they're easy to be seen. That's about 58% of the voters in Utah. We have 24% make up the private. Those are people who have opted out so that their information is not shared with anybody besides legislators or people in the need to know. And the third category that is unique to Utah is withheld. And that is a category for policemen, domestic abuse survivors, very famous people who don't want their information out. I get that. My problem with that category is that they're claiming 18% of the voters statewide fall in that category. It doesn't make any sense. I believe that's where this slush fund is coming from. And the math that was done on the numbers that were made available to us across those 3 counties, every single one of them had to have between 100% of all withheld people show up to vote to 117. In other words, more people would have to show up than is mathematically possible to be in that category in order to get the numbers that they're reporting. And why didn't the audit show this? Why aren't we looking at this level?
So maybe these are like people born without social security numbers in the basements of people's Mormon houses in some ritual.
They're stretching the fish at the championship is what they're doing.
I don't understand why it would be 18% for this withheld category, because I mean something like that you should have to like apply for with a permit.
That's 1/5.
So when you put that together, what that looks like is only 58% of the voter rolls we have access to as the public.
I want to praise that 1/5 of the population in those 3 counties for being so diligent on voting when nobody else in the population can get. If, as in Chicago, where Chicago gets their dead people to vote, I think we're quickly catching up. I think it's an honor and a privilege to know that in those 3 counties that they can really get the numbers out.
Well, 117%. I'm kind of wondering if they're using genealogical records or something to come up with. I don't know where they're coming from, but it doesn't make sense.
Maybe they're voting at the local temple. Just throwing it out there.
117%.
Maybe they're voting by proxy.
Sure. And let's face it, if they're celebrities, don't they deserve 2 votes? Some of them, maybe.
Sure. Why not?
But my question is,
finding.
Oh, no, go on. I'll ask this question at the very end.
Okay, I was going to tell you another finding was that some of the counties, this again is in Utah's audit. Listen to this one. Some of the counties' chain of custody practices make it difficult to account for all the ballots. But there's no fraud. There's no chance of fraud, guys. This is a gold standard. This is a definition of gold standard elections right here. The numbers don't match. We can't have a chain of custody. We can't account for everything. You know what I mean? I mean, it's comical if it wasn't so serious. Another point was that Utah lacks clear legal standards for election signature verification. One of the things about this election signatures is you have a setting on those machines where you can turn it on so that it accepts every signature, no matter what it looks like. I'm not saying they did that. They have the option.
And we know Salt Lake County has purchased and runs those particular specific machines where just with the flip of a switch, you can automatically verify signatures. We know those are run in Salt Lake County.
What county are you guys in?
So I used to be in Salt Lake County, and now I'm in Davis County.
Okay, you're in Davis.
I'm in Salt Lake.
And you're in Salt Lake. Okay.
In Draper.
So you guys are in some of the honest counties. That gets the diligent counties, I think we should call it. The counties that strive for patriots to show, all of them, 117% to show up. How does Tooele County fare on this?